All right, just checking on Twitter here. Looks like we are live back for another Proof of Beauty podcast, episode number 19, guys. Pretty awesome. It's nice to see that we were able to be consistent for this many episodes, and I'm excited to see, how far we make it. But how was your week, guys?
It's been a good week. Quieter.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
for me, it's been the pace is slower, which I didn't know I needed until it slowed down. Um,
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
I think the last since the statues, it's been a lot of decisions very fast, and I don't mean like big decisions. I mean like technical decisions, like should this thing look like that, and it just came in and do this week. It's like, wow, I am very fatigued when it comes to making those calls.
Hmm.
And yeah,
That
yeah,
makes
like
sense.
now
Yeah.
in like hindsight, I'm like, there's some pretty dumb calls I made. Like we could have done it better, and I think that's we to kind of allude to that conversation. I think that's where kind of 721Z as our
Mm-hmm.
conception internally
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
is the
Mm-hmm.
result of. It's been a lot of just condensing the ideas that, but in condensing, I realized I made some pretty dumb ideas. So, um,
Are you also feeling a similar sense of exhaustion, Ash?
I mean, coming off Epics and Merge, right? It's kind of like we got this thing in front of us that we just have to like keep chipping it away and keep alive, like, keep that
Mm-hmm.
fire going, and kind of stepping away from that last couple. I mean, it's been pretty much like 2-3 weeks for me now. September 15th, right?
Right.
Stepping away was good, like not really doing a whole lot. I think now, actually, since last week's conversation with all of us together, we have a pretty like much more coherent idea to like what we're doing next, and then why are we doing it too, which is important. Um, and then what are we expecting too, right? It's like not everything is going to be. We can't expect every project to be like a home run type thing. So if we're really
Mm.
focused on the creativity aspect and kind of like getting our own check boxes out of the way, and defining what those are, we'll feel a lot. I'll feel a lot better, at least, about like
Yeah.
progressing towards that. So um, we didn't talk about too much what's coming next, but we're gonna close off. We're gonna finish off Epics and Merge, and
Right.
kind of see what happens with that experience, first and foremost. Which I did not make much
Yeah.
progress yet at all. So David's wrapping up contract. Yeah.
yeah, it's like it had such an interesting challenge where when I'm gonna go a little technical here, when you do an action that changes something on the blockchain, and let's just say the token URI reacts to it, how do you simulate it?
Right.
And that became a really big question in my head. It was like, well, because it's not like, oh, I simulated a compound borrow, and so the transaction itself is the end state. No, it's like the transaction creates something, and then another function apparatus has to react to change number one, right? If that made any
Mm.
sense. It's not like one action. It's a
Oh
one
yeah,
action and a
actually,
second action that reacts
how are
to
you
the first one.
how are you deving this? Did you have everything uploaded? Do you have at least some of the statues uploaded to testnet, like, and are kind
I've
of
been forking locally the networks.
okay,
So
okay,
like
okay.
I've been
Oh yeah,
that's why
yeah,
it's been very
that's
hard
better.
for me to been developing, because like for example, Rinkeby has been deprecated, right? In our test
Yeah,
contracts, we're on Rinkeby, so it would
yeah,
have taken us a few hours just re-migrating it to like a Gourley
yeah,
to a live net. So we're kind of constrained that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, like I literally spent like all of yesterday just sitting there, it's like how do I do something and then get the result of it without actually doing that something as a gas transaction, right? Like I'd always simulate two sequences of actions, one contingent on the first one being played correctly, um, and because usually when I call token URI, right, like that's just one action, right? Like you don't have to like simulate it like, oh, I did a ritual before it, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, do I have to like build a new set of renderers that we're simulating, and then that are like called simulating renderers are designed to simulate a ritual? But I was like, that's like so proprietary. It's like you would have to write a renderer for our 6 to 8 renderers that we have on our stack. I was like, that's
Shoot.
not happening, and I don't have that time. So I think we got something that works really. That is really, I wouldn't say on the jank meter, definitely on the jankier side, but it works. But yeah, I didn't realize that was a challenge, but that's like a weird challenge that on-chain art, or even correction, not even just on-chain art, just
It's like sequential
dynamic
logic.
art
Yeah.
has, right? You gotta react to something happening. So then how do you simulate a reaction? That's because you gotta simulate the action first, then you simulate the reaction, right? Which isn't quite a thing that NFTs has done. Maybe in the DeFi space, that's a little bit more of a common practice because they're maybe simulating like hacks, simulating massive like whale trading behaviors, but it was definitely a fresh challenge, and it makes me think a lot more about 721Z, and should there be more discipline when it comes to this design pattern? How do you simulate action? Because I think that's what Z is all about. It's about creating complex metadata structures that can react to different things.
These are action. Yeah.
Right. It was a weird challenge. I sat there and was like, wait, I never thought of this as a problem, and it is I hope that we have a solution. But yeah, that was a tangent, but
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the I think findings of David is ones like for me to kind of distill the copy into like very simple ideas, and we're actually making pretty good progress, I think, towards describing like what 721Z actually is in like a 1-2 sentence thing, and then probably listing these types of problems would make a lot of, or these types of like scenarios would kind of outline it to a developer. What exactly is the interesting thing, and then what kind of complications does that even cause? You know.
It's like it's part of like you track down the rabbit hole. Like this is like one of the weird like you gone far enough where you don't want to go back up, so you got to go through and figure out how to solve this problem. Kind of a rabbit hole challenge.
Exactly.
But yeah. So between transmutation ritual work, I've also been working on the contracts, not specifically how to communicate it. That's been on Ash's shoulders. The contract work, I'm pretty freaking excited about it, not just at a in like oh, this is cool ideas. I think internally it solves a lot of our problems. Externally, I think it is a weird evolution of ABF. 721Z is a generalization almost of what a metadata system is, and so ABF now becomes like a expression of 721Z. It's like an example of 721Z, and I think it's probably the most straightforward example. It's like a very, it just feels like it's like the most like generative art feeling example of it. Which again, 721Z is not just about generative art. It's about whatever kind of metadata expressions you want. But in the exercise of building 721Z, I had to unintentionally rebuild ABF, and that was a kind of a fun dogfooding experience. Where it was like, how do you build ABF within the 721Z thing? And yeah, I think all forms of exciting, I think, in that domain right now. At least because I mean, I'm speaking more on the technical side of things here.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're starting to, like, I know when we first started talking about it, we were all kind of like, okay, we have a name. It's a thing. Do you feel further ahead,
Well, I think Ash put it well last time. It's just like it's just putting your metadata systems in a separate contract that has a standard. That's the
Yeah, it's
most
very
like you
simple
dumb
idea.
it down to all you remove all of the fluff
Fancy
technical
shit.
crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Now I think saying that statement for anybody who's very solidity curious would ask, okay, well then if it is another contract, what can that be? What kind of construction can you do? And that's where we can go into the weeds with
Mhm.
721Z or with example case study projects, right? Because that's where the expression can really cater towards your exact concerns.
Hmm.
So to an extent, not that Epic statue is a 721Z. It pretty much is. It's just
I mean, it is.
it's just not.
Yeah.
It's just we didn't construct it so.
It's not its final form. It's not a final.
Yeah, it's
form.
not in its final form. That and like say ABF, right? They're both Z standard in our sense because
Right.
Your metadata is handled by somewhere else. But they're entirely like almost like two different trees of thought of how do you present metadata. And those are, in my opinion, both equally valid expressions, right? So I don't think 721Z is the on-chain NFT standard. It's the metadata standard.
Hmm.
And metadata can be on-chain, could be half on-chain, could be fully on-chain, whatever fits your concerns.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and I was talking to this week. Jack actually moved to New York from Manifold, so it was nice, kind of like passing. I didn't tell him about the 721Z name yet, and so I wanted to get his reaction, his blank slate reaction. So first thing he was kind of like, "Well, it's kind of funny, right?" He was like, "Well, you should call it something else if you don't want people at Manifold to make fun of you." And I was like, "Good point." But the name is justified in many aspects, right? It's like if we were to use like a different call it completely something else, the concept wouldn't really catch on, or it would just be too detached from what the idea actually is, which is simple, right? I mean,
I think the name is fine.
Yeah. Have the metadata handled by a separate contract. Actually, I think we're in a really good place with the name, and then some of the ideas David sent over to me this week of essentially represents, right, the best implementation of the minting experience, and C is just a set of ideas, abstraction of how to handle.
You're referring to 721A, right? The Azuki standard.
Yeah,
first sorry.
I said, yeah.
Just want to clear.
Yeah.
A is like, what kind of A is this? Is like.
Oh yeah, 721A, yes, and then 721Z is best summarized by just our set of ideas for metadata implementation, which then balloons into extreme complexity. So I think one of the things is like just getting the copyright on the site, kind of distilling interesting ideas, and then kind of like putting some flowcharts possibly on the site. I think it would help clarify things for ourselves too. I think on how to say like this is a 721Z project, and I kind of brand it and market it that way. Because the user interaction is really the selling point. It's like, okay, that live service aspect. Yeah, I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but Manifold's like drop, like experience. So they basically like Zora has a drop page, right, where like you can mint an NFT and then like set all the parameters of people claiming it or minting it. And so I think Manifold has their own version of that, and it's pretty much surpassed volume of Zora, or pretty much equivalent. I could see this making a lot of sense for what they do, because they're already doing like boutique consulting work for each artist, right? So you have the drop, and then now it's just a matter of releasing subsequent contracts for interaction, right? It makes perfect sense from a business model standpoint.
Oh yeah.
So. Well, it's like we're gonna be in the future where contract sovereignty gets more important. I think flavors of sovereignty will now become a huge thing, where there's going to be like the manifold sovereignty flavor. It's kind of like I kind of think of it almost as like government design, like sovereignty, in the sense that there's like a lot of constitutional monarchies. There's a lot of more like American style democratic organizations. There's a lot more like single party systems. Like they're all flavored, if that made any sense. I think we'll see NFT contracts start to have flavors, and I think now me being very jaded and having worked in like DevOps, dev sailing, not DevOps, but like dev evangelizing, if that's the right way to say it. I'd be very surprised if a lot of organizations don't create their own sovereign flavors. In part, it's kind of the reflection that the team has enough capacity to do it. But I think 721Z is a kind of our sovereign flavor of what we want out of the most expressible contract system. And I'm certain that Manifold has their own like modular ins and outs that and maybe Zora even I think Zora does with their own contract things. They've done that from the beginning. There should be a lot of convergence at some point. Maybe converging to the point where only one of these standards exist, and we just all kind of colloquially backed it.
Whoa.
Kind of like what 728 kind of did because of how damn good it is. Now, yeah, like I think there's a lot of ideas that we can flow. 720. It's like putting your contract metadata, like putting your metadata in the contract that you call, isn't a particularly revolutionary idea.
Yeah,
I think it's our willingness to make that system dry, like reusable, dry. What is that? What does that
repeat
stand
yourself.
for again?
Don't repeat yourself.
Right. Right. So we have a lot of our renderer systems, like encoding a GIF image.
Yeah.
All these things are all modular. They all are the same kind of boxed. So it's like a very, for front end guys and gals, React philosophy, right? Like, sure, I don't think React's idea of like componentized, UI flows is a particularly new idea, but the idea that there's like we all follow props and components out, right? Like there's like a constraint there, and where you kind of said, let's go make that constraint for metadatas. And by making that constraint, we can have a lot more expressibility in using other people's work, right? Like where we stand at a place where, like, if we were to want to reuse, say, Terraform's contracts, there's not much we can reuse beyond just like their noise function, their random function or whatever, right? Like everything else is proprietary, which is kind of antithetical to how development usually works, where we use npm, we download everybody else's work, right? So like the 721.
This is an extremely important point. I think that just cannot be hammered in more, right? It's like how different Ethereum development is to actual normal engineering, right?
Yeah, so we are trying to take that approach. Like in the Z family of contracts, there's even a very jank, I wrote a jank, kind of like an npm registry or like a package manager where you can register your renderers, and you could even register your renderers into like a massive folder. So you could do like image renderers inside there. You can use human readable names to just pull a renderer, and then we just like return you the address of it, so you can immediately use it within your contracts very easily, right? So we are building some more approachable context, because I think what Z indirectly is also kind of implicating is writing Solidity is hard, and it's daunting for a lot of folks. Makes sense because it's mission critical, it's familiar, but then there's a lot of little gotchas in the language. And for folks that are not interested in like the DeFi world, where Solidity engineering is quite a dark science. If you're more interested only in the NFT side, like an NFT contract, there's not that many ways you can rewrite an NFT contract, so it's all cookie bake crap, right? But if you're just interested in like, how do I use this to do really fancy visual production, right? There's not been a safe place for you to build that knowledge base as a community. I think Math Castle's Discord maybe is one of the first few homes of that. I think Z can become Z, maybe its flavor expressions of it, like ABF or whatever, can be maybe for a lot of folks their first time writing Solidity, where they're like, hey, I'm not managing millions of dollars of funds. I'm just trying to make a pixel green or a red, right? And that could just be a more familiar or more open-minded way for folks to enter our world as crypto developer and
So one of the questions I have is like, do you think we need a better word than a renderer? Because it makes sense to us, but it's quite limiting to a normal person's
You're right.
understanding what renderer is.
It's like if we we can even refer to it as a component. If we do a very React flavored way of an expression. The renderer word is getting looser and looser by the day, in the sense that like, as I understand, a render is always implied to be a visual expression, right? You don't render audio, right? You master audio.
Yeah.
That's the right verb, right? Like
I mean, technically, render as a definition means to process anything. That's what renderer actually means.
Right.
But we don't use it like that. Like no one uses it.
Because I always tie it to a visual output in my head.
Interesting.
Which I don't know if is actually the pragmatics of the word.
Which is the common,
that makes sense,
common use.
Yeah.
Common use of that. So like component could make sense, but maybe it's like a little too generic, like too close to other stuff that people wouldn't get it. Like it really is like a stack, right? I mean, it's just like you're using it like Legos, you know?
Yeah. So like kind of like how we rate React websites, right? Like your top level component that you wrote, right? Like that you can't just like npm install a hash, right?
Yeah.
Just get like a right, but like the individual components can be modular. I think that's what our component renderer system kind of implies, where like that top level contract that actually interfaces with your 721Z NFT, that probably to an extent is proprietary. That is whatever you needed to do. But then below it, if you need to have GIF files, you need to have a future WAV file, or you want to have this or that, those are all just another set of renderers that you just have to figure out how to call back and forth and get the subroutines working, and then voila, you have your construction, right? Instead of the current philosophy, which is every line of code is your line of code, right? It's very monolithic right now.
So like maybe if we divide, so like I guess like from so you have the NFT contract, that token URI is on that points to another contract within that's your root basically, right? That's your root renderer.
Yeah, you could think of it as almost as your root, yeah.
And then that root is basically talking to a bunch of plugins and components, whatever way you arrange
or
that, right?
I guess in our current, without finalizing the word, another set of renderers.
So I think
for example,
as long as we make that distinction between root and then the rest of everything else, it's kind of maybe will click a little bit easier for people.
Yeah, to an extent. I think that's where we need examples, right? Like ABF, for example, has the ABF metadata renderer, which is the root of the whole system. But if you look at what it actually is doing, what's going behind the scenes, it first calls a virtual machine. And that virtual machine right now is brainfuck the language. But the idea now is you can swap in Lisp.
But the root
Solidity.
we could call the root the metadata compositor, right? Very MCE.
Right. It's like I think we have had this language. We called it the RCE and I completely forgot. In Epics, right?
Epics,
we call it something else, compositing render. There's a lot of languages, but to an extent, it's a renderer with an adjective in front of it. If that made any sense, right? Because you can still use it just like any other renderer. You can have another root level calling this root level. That was very confusing, right? But again, it's about linguistics more than it's about technical design here.
Maybe just metadata compositors, just calling it MCs, and then
it still is a renderer.
It's not really.
It's just
fucking hell.
It still is like its interface doesn't change, right? It's again, I'm not arguing
it's
against
still a renderer,
It's all language. It's all language here.
Yeah, exactly, right.
So
okay. I wanted to bring up a very interesting point I was thinking about this week, in relation to like what we're thinking about, right? So we're basically betting heavy on user interaction, the liveliness of feature sets. I would say those are kind of the two big things, right? That we can boil down to. So if that's the case, then we're also betting big on custom UIs, and I think that's something we just want to clarify internally, right? Like
Hmm.
more and more
Yeah,
custom
yeah.
UIs. And then that's also what we're suggesting for the space as overall. Because I was talking to Jack about this, because essentially Manifold's strategy here is making everything as Lego block as possible, right? They're doing all this consulting work, they're doing stuff for different people, they're trying to make everything generic along the way. They simply don't even have enough engineering to meet demand, and so they're trying to make everything as generic as possible.
Right.
Hmm.
But we're ultimately suggesting that the future of NFTs relies on very, very custom, high fidelity UI. Probably that's basically what we're
I
betting
think
on.
short term we're just have like a labor shortage.
Yeah.
I may be wrong in such an argument. I think the
Well,
specialization of skills.
less to do with the any development. I'm just talking like that's the direction, right? We're essentially betting on, and especially with
Yeah,
721.
I think there's gonna be
Hmm.
contractions of and like expansions of that bespokeness. I think we're gonna enter an era where most things are bespoke because we haven't figured out what are worthy of modularizing in
Hmm.
any sense of the word. And then there's going to be some things that gets modularized, but because those things get modularized, that frees up more people to do more crazier stuff, and then the cycle kind of cracks, right? But I do think um, the world will get a lot more bespoke as I think our demand for what is an NFT rises a little bit. And
Hmm.
Yeah.
also too, it's just like this bull market. I'm gonna be honest, like we pretty much exhausted all the variables of what you can do with a currently defined NFT. I think there's maybe a few other ideas that we haven't fully explored, but like within the
Hmm.
constraints of like I mint an IPFS thing, how many ways can you get to there? Like how many ways is there to like
Right.
go from point A to point B, and then from point B to staking or to PFP it to whatever current our paths are? We're kind of like
I have a question on that note, actually. Something I've been thinking about. I've been seeing the term live NFT around, and I've also seen other
yeah.
people call it a dynamic NFT. And Chainlink actually has a definition for a dynamic NFT, which is paraphrasing here, but simply an NFT that can be influenced by external metadata.
Yep.
I'm wondering
By
how
us, by
similar.
Chainlink. A dynamic NFT is influenced by Chainlink's Oracle.
Or maybe, but I'm wondering. Dang, I forgot where I was going with that. But I'm wondering how much you would consider, say, Mana a dynamic NFT or a live NFT, and just in general, I'm wondering how much that liveness attribute is baked into what you would call 721Z, and if that
Uh,
is another frontier people would be interested in.
well, it's not a particularly new frontier. Like
No.
async art was one of the first live, I guess, sensed NFT. I remember way back, there was an NFT that like reacted to the time of day.
Mm-hmm.
I think, or something like that, where like
But that was all
sometimes those
off-chain
event.
methods, right? These are all off-chain
Hmm.
Yeah,
methods.
yeah. Well, yeah.
Right.
Like again, like we're not talking in the sense that like these are fully Web3. I'm saying like
Okay.
just for the means of getting a live NFT, this hasn't been a
Yeah, it's
particularly
possible.
new
Yeah.
creative
Right.
expression.
I mean, you just
Um,
pointed
Right.
to a
Right.
website and you change what's on the website, basically, right?
Yeah,
Just like-
and like Chainlink is implicating a more Web3 safe expression of this creative direction.
Yeah.
721Z is totally capable of supporting it towards the
you don't
whole
have to. Yeah.
traditional async art way, which is what Ash said, pointing to a
Mhm.
website all the way out to a fully on-chain experience, or even in the middle where you're like, oh, I have a website and I inject with JavaScript like a global variable that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that is dependent to user state. Like there's so many ways you can do it.
Right.
Is the
Right.
idea with
Okay.
721Z.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Now again, I think
And
it's just a matter of market. Like I'm, they're cool, and I think they're all.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to express something like that, express it. I don't really have a problem with it. Now I don't think the market quite cares.
Right.
If it is or isn't. If it does well, it does well. I don't think that was an X
Yeah.
factor for making
I
it
hear you.
doing well,
Yeah.
right? But then again, I think I think our current reconciliation of what is dynamic art or live art is a little bit kind of short-handed because it's always been like I react to the weather data or to
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
this or
I
that,
mean,
where it's not that
NFT
personal.
land is pretty much existing in the realm of is it new, novel, or cool? All right, it
Right.
sells pretty much, right? It's like
So-
there's not the idea doesn't have to be any more sophisticated than that. So
Right.
that's why
Right.
they got away with day or night type shit, you know.
Right.
Not that by
So-
itself is interesting. Go ahead.
Right. I was going to say, so would you guys make a distinction then between a dynamic NFT, which is, influenced by whatever external source, versus a live NFT on chain? Or would perhaps you only be able to call that NFT truly live if it exists on chain? Or is that just not correct? And the reason I would think that is just because you have the components existing on chain, not coming from some.
Well, live doesn't really imply to me it's on chain or not,
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
right?
Maybe like real time compute is slightly more like that's the wordage
Mhm.
I've been using on the website. I mean, that's not
Yep.
sexiest wording, but real time compute kind of captures the
That's a
gist
good
of
term.
what the hell we're trying to do, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
But not really, because like even websites do the same shit. Like I don't know, like it's hard to.
it's like the website
I hear what you're
website
saying,
direction right
yeah.
now. With it's like again like Z doesn't imply on chainness
Mm-hmm.
as a standard. It implies whatever you want to do. Now, on chainness, I think, is a reflection of project demand or market sentiment now that like people are saying, "Hey, I don't accept the IPFS based new project. I want only on chain." And I'm certain new teams will put it as a hard requirement to do on chain.
Right.
But if you think of it that way, where we kind of like where we stand by the position that we're open minded about creating something that's awesome in expression, I'd be very hard pressed for a Z project to not handle it in that expression. Now,
Yeah.
does that project demand an on-chain quality to it for its liveness, like
Mhm.
Mana, for example?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. Like it's Z would just kind of like, okay, cool, no problem, let's do it, right? But then
But
like,
the
what
key
if you?
thing is the user interaction. I think that's really the main thing we care about with 721Z, right? Mana is you get inherent mana. It's set.
Right, but then
whenever
like
you have
let me throw a design philosophy you can do, which is
Yeah.
kind of which I find very interesting. So consider if you build a metadata for an NFT that's like a website, so it has fetchability, has network requests, and your user. So let's consider it as like an avatar that you can dress up, right? If let's consider a more Web 2 proposal here. Let's say it calls an API that the company controls that says clothing and gives you all the clothing to dress it up with. Now, in that case, the user interactivity is them going through the website and updating their database and their HTML web like NFT if it's IPFS or if it's fully on chain makes a network call to a Web 2 service.
Okay.
It achieves like we could have done Mana like that is what I'm also implying.
Right.
We didn't,
right.
Because Mana being on chain and everything.
Mhm.
And that's
on
not
Web 2.
necessarily like just to go on like a broader. I don't want to interrupt too much, but like in a broader conversation of NFTs, the on chainness is not necessarily the interesting part of it, right? So even in an off chain situation like that, you can still make it pretty interesting and whatnot. And like you're just using NFTs for the tradability essentially, so your company doesn't have to handle trading in whatever way you want to do that, you know.
Right.
You just have to handle data, as any company has to usually, but we don't want to, which is why we're going in the direction we're doing, you know.
So is the real reason to use on chain in a case like this just because of the efficiency?
It's efficiency.
Efficiency is a strong word. It's a strong word.
Fair enough.
It's kind of like if I'm gonna like buy a performative art piece, and half of it is just a black box that when I purchase, I don't get access to, and I can't access its history, its place in the world, the provenance of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes the art piece lesser on the secondary.
Mm-hmm.
It's less of an
But
art
that's-
piece. You can make a game. You can make a damn good game off chain and do all the crazy shit you want to do, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
we're going for
Um,
art
on a-
pieces.
on a
Mhm.
technical level, on-chain does reduce race conditions a
Mhm.
lot more, in the sense that like if you have like 10 inbound like mana consumption transactions, like the blockchain very clearly will sequence it and play for you, whereas a more centralized system you would have to figure out your own kind of like ordering mechanic, which you can
Mhm.
sure do it by temporal, like whenever you received it or whatever, but that could even be a little bit massaged in the sense that like if we're talking like milliseconds or nanoseconds of difference. But there's like it gives you finality. That's a really nice technical thing.
Hmm.
Two, which I think is really cool, is it allows the window of time for an art project to go from this is a year and a half project to like, yeah, if God knows why I have passed away, my art lives, right? Like
Right.
I think it's very interesting. I think it's very different when you're saying like I am creating a school project, which I just have to get a grade, versus I am creating like my final artwork before I'm dying from cancer, right?
Right.
And you would invest in a different way into that performative expression of yourself,
Permanence. Yeah, the
right?
permanence, whatever.
And I think
Mhm.
the on-chain stuff kind of gives you that edge. But then again, you just got to choose what you want to express. If you just want to express something that, like, hopefully it makes you $1 million along the way, why would
Right.
you do on-chain, right? It just doesn't really quite matter. But then if you're a lot more interested in the creative stuff, or you want to create a project that takes freaking 10 years to complete, say you create a project that like you put in money, it's like a 10-year vest lock, and then you get the money out and get a new NFT or whatever. There's no reasonable way to do that without being on chain, right? Like there's like certain qualities of
Yeah.
art expression that,
Isn't there a project that does that, Dave? Isn't there a project that actually you could mint
I-
certain names, and right, and it counts down over like an absurdly long period of time? Like one of them is like in 2,000 years or something like that. You can
Right.
hit the final one or whatever.
yeah, and like internal projects like Pincer, it's one of those things that like
Yeah.
I have
It's
a very
literally
hard pressed
requires
way.
that.
Like I'm certain we could do it like with like AWS,
Mhm.
but like it doesn't make sense. It just
Right.
doesn't make sense in what it needs and its expression. So
Yeah.
it's like right tool for the right job. Now I don't think that the market or the industry collectively has figured out. Like we got this tool in our hands, but we haven't quite figured out when is the best time to use it and when is not. I think
Mm.
is my very humbled way to say that we have a lot to figure out still. It's like
Right.
because on chain, it's a lot more work, right? At least right now, a lot more work because it's not a lot of standards. Everything is proprietary, black boxed. It costs more money, right, to go on chain. So there still is a few cons, but I think there's some people are of the camp that like we go on chain or die, right? Like it's like a very 100% or no, we don't do it. But I'm more of the sentiment that it's a lot more of a gradient. Where as a studio, I think we will stand by the policy that we will continue to make IPFS based projects, and we can make fully on chain projects, or we make stuff that's like 75% on chain, 25% IPFS,
Right.
or a little bit more of a 25%. On chain, 75% on chain. It's whatever the
Right.
project demands, right? But like for example, the first year of Proof of Beauty, we only had IPFS, right?
Mhm.
So that limited a lot of our ideas. But now that Epic's merge kind of cleared out that this polarity exists now too, I think we're now going to kind of pincer movement, pincer
Yeah.
movement inwards and like figure out all the nuances of design. And I think 721Z is a culmination of a lot of these ideas as we move
Right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'm gonna try to prototype with is just like using with a token. It has nothing to do with Z. It's just like, can you unlock something? Can you decrypt a package with ownership of a token? Start
You mean
there.
like send it from one place to another in blocks?
No, it's like
Yeah.
it's like, let's say I have like some encrypted payload on a website, and then you can only decrypt that payload if you own a specific token.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Which has any project done that, David?
That's really hard. I'm sitting here absolutely stumped. How? Like if you have a requirement of it being fully Web3 or decentralized, that's quite a big ask.
Yeah, maybe like the decryption part wouldn't be done on chain, right? And even the payload itself wouldn't be on chain.
Right. So it's like if there is an encrypted body of something, you owning it, then pretty much is how do you hand a private key to them? Or not private key, but how do you hand a public key that could decrypt it? Correction, right?
Yeah.
If it's RSA or whatever. I think you're gonna have to pull a page out of Mars Meyer.
Yeah.
Because they do some really weird secret sharing thing that I don't quite fully understand right now, but they probably have the best direction of it.
Yeah.
When it comes to like how do you, again, because everything in the blockchain is public.
Yeah.
How do you share secret stuff?
There's locally you're locally
conditions.
decrypting your bid. Yeah. Okay.
Back to what you were saying before, Dave, about like the people that are like on chain or die. Do you think the main component to that? Question for both of you, really. Do you think the main like thing driving that is this push for decentralization and this like almost like anti-centralization sentiment that's becoming so prominent?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I guess it is like a very strong like philosophical argumentation. But then like I keep thinking back to what one of the folks at Pinata said. You build your metadata apparatus for the actual constraints of your problem. In the sense that like if your project is meant to last for 30 years, you choose the best medium that lasts for 30 years.
Right.
Right. It's not like you like back in the day we don't go and like record a home video on like a magnetic tape that we use to archive all of humanity history and stuff it into Arctic, right? Like we use a VHS, which has a degrading quality that like in 10 years it's gone, right? Like the little physical tape and it's whatever the magnetic stuff just starts screwing stuff over, right? An SD card, right? Like it's, I think, a reflection of medium. It's just what gets the job done. And I do think on-chain art, like maximalists, I do think it kind of it's reductive to what is art. How do you perform it?
Yeah.
But then I can see why they feel that way, and I feel like you kind of need them to kind of like prove you wrong, in the sense that they'll be the guys who will prove you like, hey, actually, what you thought couldn't be done on chain can be done on chain, and better. Then be like, well, I didn't think that way because I'm not that strongly opinionated about going on chain. So they have a place in the world.
Right.
But then I guess by that inverse, we have a place in the world because we are arguing hybrid designs can do exactly what you need.
Right.
And so we cleared a path for kind of on chain or enough on chain, right? And then they can argue the fully on chain narrative, right? Like we could have done merge epics with all the images on IPFS, right? And not on chain, and just composited it on chain. That could have been totally valid design philosophy, right?
Right.
And it is like, and then you would argue, like, is that on chain enough? Who knows, right? That I would say that leads more into like the 50% IPFS or whatever. I don't know. But it's a very gray conversation because we don't quite. This whole bull market was pinned on pretty much IPFS and occasionally a few on-chain art projects that are largely 100% on-chain.
Right.
Everything was a binary flip, and yeah, like we don't not to say that we have any examples of anything that's not hybrid yet.
Mhm.
I think coming soon maybe. If there's any
Yeah.
idea that
Right.
needs it, but
Are you guys a little bit of a
We'll
go on.
definitely have some hybrid shit, I think, in the
Yeah.
next thing.
yeah,
Maybe not in terms of the art, but in terms of like other stuff, that we live upload.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Are we seeing any NFT action on Layer 2s yet, guys? Anything
what
that stands
sense?
out? Just like anything that stands out, any big projects, any movement. Really wondering if there's been any kind of like migration of trying to build NFT communities or collections on Layer 2s yet.
Well, there is projects.
There are,
Now
right.
I'm not the one to ask or answer that. How live it is at the current state of things. Now again, like I have quite a few Tezos NFTs. I don't really own anything on Polygon.
Mm-hmm.
They're just really young, and when we operate in a world where 99% of the folks are largely concerned on capital returns, it's kind of like shooting yourself in the metaphorical knee if you go under Polygon, if you want to like make the big bucks, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to. So my minds keep taking a step back. Like I don't know. This week I've been thinking a lot about like fundamentals of why even NFTs like why even do it. I'm trying to come up with analogies in my head, explaining it to people. So like, one I was thinking is like, okay, like in the used car market, used cars are basically NFTs, right? Fundamentally, but you can't actually. There's no good marketplace for people buying and flipping cars, or it's not even necessarily easy for someone to do that because all the value is from the friction, essentially, right? Going through Craigslist, like finding shit that's like a good deal
Right.
or whatever, and trying to flip it, or finding something that's like run down and restoring it, right? And then, but if that whole thing was tokenized and made seamless into like perfect like marketplace of liquidity of buy side, sell side, and like attribute matching. Essentially, that's what cars have. They have attributes, right? Then all the price action of people buying and flipping cars would have been squeezed down to nothing, right? And then the all the value would be in the highly custom, highly restorative jobs, where there's like a large story behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you see the analogy I'm making here basically is, and
well, I don't believe we should be tokenizing cars.
I'm not saying that we're
right.
I'm not saying we should do it. I'm just saying I'm saying
Right.
as a thought experiment of why NFTs, right? It's like what exactly, like if you're trying to explain to someone why tokenize a digital asset, right? Okay, it's basically like used cars, right? Like you're trying to reduce, like squeeze down that friction and make that process efficient. Not that it can even necessarily be achieved well. Now it's like when I think about, okay, then why tokenize a visual digital file, right? It doesn't actually make sense when I think about it, because the primary purpose of visual art is to be displayed for the most part, unless it's
makes
like
a lot of sense if you made $100,000, right?
Well, the most important attribute here is the ownership attribute. Like even if I was say like a graphic designer, like there's a lot of different ways I could tokenize what I'm creating. I could make a font and tokenize it. I could make an image. I can make a video, whatever it is, right? I just look at it as a format for me to almost like protect my work. It's almost like a copyright in some regards without it being a formal copyright, because it puts your ownership stamp on it, right?
Copyright only matters as long as someone respects it, right? To some degree.
Well, then that's the same argument for NFTs. It only matters when enough people respect it. But a lot of people do respect it, right?
Right.
Right. At least they respect it enough for Bored Apes to be whatever its price, right?
Exactly. Right. So I mean, one is like one, I was just thinking about that situation overall. It's like okay, visual art right now. It's like it is a little bit absurd in that aspect, right? It's like the whole right click save as is a very interesting conversation when I think about it. Truly, right? Because if you're limiting it to just images, okay, I can see where like the confusion and absurdity kind of comes from, right? So then the obvious answer for me is that you have to be able to very aggressively push beyond visuals. Like the art piece has to be so ephemeral around the token and ownership of the token that is what. Oh, there's nothing to display. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's no absurdity in that. If you're to create an art piece that is an NFT and you're owning it, and the whole experience and art of it is ephemeral and not necessarily visual as its root, then it makes sense. You know. Otherwise, basically, I'm trying to figure out how do I remove absurdity from the token concept, from the NFT concept, right?
But wait.
I'm not making. I'm
making the argument to say art is absurd.
Quite often it is.
Right, like I find the absurdity of a Fidenza being 100 ETH.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, like I'm not here questioning the right click save movement. I'm not here. It's like it happened.
Yeah.
Maybe there's no deep meaning beyond it. It happened. It happens to be 100 ETH, and sometimes I get really frustrated by the absurdity of why things work, why it doesn't work. But then again, towards the ephemeral stuff, I do think that we've had a very rich history of projects that when people think they get it, I think they really mean, oh, I get why this is an NFT. Hash being one of the best examples of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, Hash is one of the best
examples. It's not necessarily the visuals. It's almost a story that got there. That this stamp on the blockchain with an image happens to capture. Right? But in such a sense of the word, it has its own absurdity to it. It's like, why did you have to stamp it this way? Why couldn't you have stamped it that way? Or why couldn't you just given me an official certificate or whatever? I don't know. There's just like a lot of ways I can question my own absurdity to the point where like I kind of just like it's kind of like face the music, face the light, face the warmth. I do think some things are more absurd than others. Now, I think a really successful NFT art market has the gradient of absurdity, where there's like some things you just sit there, like this is literally a freaking banana duct tape on a wall, kind of a moment, and then there's like more stuff. It's like, oh, okay, I get why it's an NFT. It's not a right click save thing, right? There's like, I think that gradient has to be as rich as it can get, because I think there's gonna be folks that are a little bit more on the banana duct tape to a wall thing, and then there's more folks that demands a little bit more of it. But I think art stretches that domain. I don't think it.
I mean,
I stand by the open-minded. I stand by to be very open-minded about this. Now, I have my own creative. What's the best way? A creative demand of my own work that would probably never make me create a banana duct tape to a wall kind of moment. Kind of a project. I don't really have that kind of intrigue. I'll leave that to some other folks.
Modern art.
Yeah.
Leave that to modern art.
So, I have my own reasons, but I'd like to think that without knowing what really is an NFT to me, like I'm fine with that. I'm fine with embracing what people can tell me and teach me along the way, and what I want out of it.
Right. Ash, with respect to your thought about the car, were you looking at the car as like the NFT itself, or like wouldn't the NFT almost be like the registration, and then like the expression of the data or whatever it is the car itself, and the right click save as movement is just like all the people taking photographs of that car?
Well, people aren't really thinking about it like that, right? It's like when you think about an NFT, you're thinking as an encapsulated thing. You're not thinking about it as a pointer, as a certificate that points to something, which is what it actually is, right?
But, so that'd be like the real world use case of it.
I'm just creating an analogy from my head of why even the concept of it. What would an NFT actually mean if I were to relate it to like a real life situation, right? Where would it come into play? So, okay, a used car is basically an NFT because it's completely uncomparable to something else. It's truly non-fungible, right?
Yeah, insurance policies are a good example for that too. Each individual's insurance policy, different, right? And you could issue a policy using a title like an NFT format quite easily. I would imagine this would be
and those are artificial contracts, and insurance policies are artificial contract on top. I'm just talking like a physical object in real life that's like non-fungible as a used car, literally, because of every imperfection, right, or the usage of it.
But the thing is, NFTs don't have that quality of patina
Yeah.
that a used car, which I would love for NFTs to a collection that has that kind of like build up of patina. But yeah, I know what you're saying when you're referring to that metaphor.
And then I'm thinking about like absurdity and like what that could mean basically to us and stuff like that. I mean, I know we're working. We definitely have, and which is why I'm even working here, right? Is made a significant progress, I think, towards that kind of concept I'm talking about. Where hash is the best example of why an NFT would exist, right? But it has its own absurd ideas of why you even chop up TXIDs on the blockchain into tokens, right? Why you even do that?
Right.
But then, which is where we're creating the meaning and the context for.
Yeah, to take a step back, I think every journey in crypto has this weird, like, I kind of mentally map it as like the realist paradox, where we're trying to map the utilitarian into our world. And then there's two ways you can do this. One is you reconcile it in a way that defeats your attitude towards crypto, which I think some folks do quite a bit. There's some that be like, well, 1 + 1 = 2 in the real world, it equals 3 in our world. Some people would just say it's a rounding error, right? And live on like that. Now, I think the most open-minded way to say it is it's just a different set of math. like it's like, I think, I spent about a year in the crypto world, in the NFT world, feeling very strongly that NFTs are just right-click save experiences and they shouldn't have value. And it took, I think, building hash for me to reconcile that it's almost a different set of geometric maths that you have to apply to, like a different, like almost like a non-Euclidean kind of geometry to value and scarcity. And I get to feel that way about, I think, early crypto, like the DeFi, the DeFi era, where or I think a lot of people were focused about how do you buy Starbucks coffee with Bitcoin or with Ethereum, which not to say is a particularly bad proposition, but I think what made DeFi is something that I don't think a lot of us were able to imagine at the time, right? Like, for example, like as of late, I think like when you try to reconcile DeFi through like a pragmatic standpoint, or even NFTs, it's hard to do so. But then when you feel the effects of it and there's really real effects, you're like, well, something happened. I don't know how to explain why. It's like, why is a Fidenza 100 ETH? Why did I make 100 ETH and I got to buy a house in real life, right? Like, it's hard to explain that through a pragmatic way. Or the point two is like, for example, right? Like, with like the interest rates, with the Federal Reserve, like because of inflation is rising so much, right? People are looking at like 3 to 5% mortgage rates, right?
Oh, way more.
Usually more, right?
Yeah.
And then you go on to Aave Finance, and you borrow USDC against your crypto. It's 1.66%. And you would ask, what? Like this is free money. There's like a 500 basis point free money opportunity here. But then, I think a lot of folks who are counter DeFi, but like, I can't reconcile this within my own set of geometries, my own set of math. Yeah. But yet this effect has come to me that I can get to access 500 basis point cheaper interest rates. Right. So there's two ways you can reconcile that: either embrace absurdity of the math, or attribute it to as a rounding error, which I think a lot of people do. Like,
that's definitely strange example. It's a strange example because it is truly math. I mean, compound is literally just math.
Right.
Which is like, there's nothing absurd about
makes it more and more like, it's not about explaining DeFi and its philosophy. It's about just feeling the effects of DeFi and how real it is for what is something that most people think is very ephemeral. They're like, where's the bank? Where's the money at? Where, like, people would ask,
that's deep. So I fundamentally separate like all of crypto and then NFTs. To me, they're completely different concepts. Like, I do see it that way pretty much. Like all of crypto makes sense from a financial, from a math, from like a philosophical standpoint. It all makes sense to me. Like, but NFTs is the one big question mark.
I
and,
think
like,
as a
wild card
word,
thing.
it stretches your geometry a little bit more, your math a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
and then by that principle, I do think it has a more of an absurdity to it than prior DeFi, for example. But I think it's almost like a evolution of the absurdity of crypto, where because
It is an
DeFi
evolution,
was such a
of course.
strong foundation, we were able to say, let's get a little bit
To
more
get to the next
absurd,
level, let's get to the next
right?
level.
To add to what you're saying, though, in terms of it being an evolution, I almost look at it as an evolution of collectibles, not just
Yeah.
of crypto, but you take the crypto component and you add it to collectibles,
Yeah,
right?
like I used to collect Yu-Gi-Oh cards, right? And
Right,
like,
and
some of those were
so
like $200.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all
right?
practical
yeah.
standpoints. These are all practical takes on NFTs, right? Like, okay, this is a utility. It is an innovation on collectibles. That's all. This is all true. I see it very like, to me, it's similar to all other aspects of life. Of like, two people can have two opposite opinions about the same thing and still be true, and that's what absurdity actually
Absolutely.
is, right?
Yeah.
And so, right, it's like and that's completely influenced by whatever pre-perception, like whatever
Right.
stuff happened to you. Like, if someone I don't like tells me to watch a movie and tells me it's good, I'm most likely not going to like it. Or if
Right.
someone tells me that I trust is good, I'm going to like it, right? Like,
Right.
so
Yeah. A lot of
when I look
absurdity.
at which is very similar to the way I see the right click save as like idea concept, right? Of like, yeah, I'm not saying it's not worth 100 ETH, but at the same time, it's not worth 100 ETH, right? Like, two things are true at the same time, right?
I feel like a lot of people who look at us and NFT world feels like we're just like wild people who thinks that like it's always worth 100 ETH or something. It's like, no,
Yeah,
it's like, we almost we embrace absurdity in the sense is like, we get your argument, but we also see the other argument.
There's always
And we're
one
not here-
wild fucker who's willing to pay 100 ETH. That's basically what it comes down to, essentially, right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
the
and
one
it's like,
You're right.
I think that like the right click savers are too hard pressed and saying like that can't be a rounding error. You guys are
yeah, they're trying to make it practical as in, oh yeah, you can't right click save as, bro. No, hell
Right.
no. It's like,
Yeah,
no,
right.
you
Yeah,
definitely can. I'm
Yeah.
still willing to pay 100 ETH for it, regardless, like, so
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
And, that
Do you-
changed my perspective on kind of like what does it mean to like make a project. Like, one is like, okay, if you're really if my concept and right click save as is definitely not on the side of the practical guys shouting on Twitter of like, you can't do that, guys, it's NFT culture, whatever, it's like, I don't give a fuck about any of that shit.
that's such a dumb
Then-
argument to me.
yeah. Then I'm going to just, start thinking about each one of these tokens like a book with a cover. And that's all it is, ultimately, which is what hash is fundamentally, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
right.
I think some of the more traditionalist BFPs are giving a lot more like a commercial rights kind of a standpoint. They're trying to force a utility into like, yeah, okay, right click save is a problem, but then we'll legally bound some rights to your NFT, which again to me is like a little bit like a duct taping it's like flex taping your problem. Hoping the leak doesn't come through. Yeah, like I know that a lot of folks are like, I've heard this camp of argument where like PFPs are dumb, but NFTs are good. Why? Because you can have title companies or you're gonna have insurance policy debts reflected as like, they believe that NFTs can reflect in financialization, which is like a very, very, very utilitarian philosophy. But then like, I keep going back to the point. It's like, if that's the case, all data is pointing the other way. Where we tried financial, like I remember Dharma Protocol way back in the day. Their whole spiel was turning your loan into an NFT and selling it on a secondary. It never worked. It still quite doesn't work right now, right?
Yeah, there's a few projects trying to do exactly that right now, and you can see that they're having trouble getting that off the ground.
Yeah, and I think it's a matter of time. One of those kind of financialization experiences really does work, but I think for it to work really well, you're going to be compromising so much on what is it being an NFT and it really just being a paper contract that has a trade settlement on a different network. That I wonder if it's really a particular innovation in the sense that are we talking about like a new financial product, or are we just talking about USDC, but for a bespoke financial contract, right? Which it's not like I don't think a lot of us says USDC is innovative. It's put money in a bank, and you created the same amount on a different network, right? So I don't know. I hear a lot of counter arguments to the world. They don't like, why are you in crypto or in NFTs? It's like something's going on, guys. It's like,
Yeah.
Well, I'm here to see it. I'm here to see and play with it and do my
I mean,
stuff.
the
I'm not here
main
to
when I try to
convince
think
you-
about it, the main advantage of businesses using a public blockchain for trading is that it just removes their liability of dealing with financial shit, whatever infrastructure or like
Mhm.
compliance shit, right? Or is that true?
The
I don't
big-
know.
The big thing that I know that the EY guys, that consulting group, they were working on they were like a pretty EVM friendly, like, team of crypto thinkers. They made their big thesis is EVM is good, but we need private EVM because Apple doesn't want to have their multi-billion-dollar purchase of TSMC chip supplies on the public blockchain where AMD and everybody else can see what their price was compared to what
Right.
they're paying, right? Like they wanted to be private. So their implication is businesses would like it if there's a better private settlement system for contractions for whatever money.
Yeah,
movements.
and that goes back to traditional like money rails, which is like not outside of even NFTs, you know.
Well, right outside of public blockchains, that's where like UI is very strong about the federated enterprise blockchains or like zero knowledge ones, but then
Right.
you could get the same thing with the enterprise that zero knowledge gets you, but easier.
Right. I'm curious now though that we see companies like Chainlink partnering up with like Swift, for example, which just directs payments, doesn't actually process them. I'm curious if you're going to start seeing more integrations happen with public blockchains because of this, or at least maybe not public, but integrations in period.
So
period.
it sounds to me that it's a one direction type thing. Like Chainlink is accessing Swift's data, not Swift doesn't give a fuck about Chainlink's data.
Is it just one way?
That's
Okay.
that's what it sounds like, at least.
I'll
You
have
know,
to
because then it's like from Chainlink's perspective, it's like if you're making a contract, it's like, okay, once this Swift transaction settles in this parameter, then trigger this.
Trigger, right,
I think that type of
Okay. Yeah.
Which is in itself pretty cool. I just think
that's cool.
That allows for quite a few interesting designs.
Yeah.
I know that Visa way back did they are settling some of their bigger transactions, not like interpersonal, not like a card transaction, but like
country to country.
Country to country via
On
public
Ethereum.
networks now, right?
Yeah.
It's like I know it's for PNG or Johnson, one of these big ass companies. Getting money out of Africa was really difficult, so they had to use BitPay to move the Bitcoin and shit out. Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Right, which I think a lot of people keep on trying to. I remember early crypto or even early NFTs are like keep on asking. This is me harping back on the point. It's like, why does Bitcoin have value? It's like, that's the wrong question. When it has value, you'll know it has value. In the sense that, like, if you're sitting there trying to make a Western like a Western Union transfer of like 100K USD to another place, and Coinbase says, hey, we could do that for a flat fee for 10 cents or for $2, let's say the gas fee, or using Polygon even cheaper. And you're like, well, which one would he do? It was just money wise, and sure, it is a more of a pragmatic answer. Now I think for the true Chad gamers in crypto, you just kind of have to know that, again, like, you don't really quite know where the direction gravity is most of the time. One month it's this way, the other month it's telling you it's actually now pixel art, and NFTs next month it's this new genre, and next month. So
that's the thing is that the core ideas of Bitcoin and crypto were still very much right. Like people were going to use it for payments. We just didn't know what they were paying for. It ended up being NFTs and DeFi shit.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. To an
Yeah.
extent, yeah.
You know, so like, so the
Yeah.
Bitcoiners were right. They just didn't weren't focused enough to make iterative steps towards that. Basically, they're just kind of hoping for some shit to happen, which it did. You know.
Yeah, I
Just in
guess
a
by the
completely
principle
different blockchain.
they hoped correctly, but maybe not in the
Yeah,
sense
yeah.
of direction that they were maybe expecting, that
Right.
Yes.
we had a massively
mean-
complex leverage world and that we have created in DeFi. But
Yeah.
Wouldn't this just come down to like Bitcoin purchasing power as well? Like it just hasn't gained the purchasing power people thought it would in
Yeah.
the amount of time, right? But
Well, I'd say it's also a lack of innovation on the Bitcoin devs' part. Can't not blame those guys, you know. So
on the note of innovation, like real world use cases, and like I guess just considering where Bitcoin is going, like, do you guys see any coming developments that excite you guys, or do you guys really think it's just like a dead space right now?
I was really excited when MakerDAO purchased $500 million worth of government bonds, American T-bills, pretty much.
Yeah.
Which I felt like was a really interesting, for one, that they were able to do it. So apparently, MakerDAO is partnering with a client bank, so they're a client of a digital asset bank that will help them settle a real world transaction. Which, in my opinion, makes a lot of sense for Maker, because a huge amount of DAI is backed by USDC. So if you think about it, this indirectly gives Coinbase or Center a lot of soft political power over MakerDAO. Because at any point they could blacklist all that collateral and be like, "Hey, your DAI is worth nothing now because I've froze X%."
Yeah, why did they do that?
It's just the governing decisions that whatever. So I think what they're doing by saying, "Hey, we're gonna maybe deleverage off of USDC and purchase government bonds ourselves." This means, I think, for them, a de-risking maneuver, right? They get less dependent on Coinbase custodying US dollar on their behalf via USDC. They do it themselves. So DAI has a central route to a government bond. And in my opinion, that's a pretty cool de-risking maneuver for MakerDAO to perform. Now, again, I don't really quite use DAI in my daily.
They're risking DAI at the chance of getting cucked by the government. So I mean,
they're going to get cucked by Coinbase right now. So they're saying, why not get cucked 1 degree closer to the problem source? I guess, right? But which I think is good, because it's like you don't know what Coinbase is going to do, right? Like it.
Yeah.
Right. Does Circle have a banking charter?
I don't think so. I
thought they were trying to pursue one. I could be wrong. I'm gonna look this up later.
No.
Yeah, I don't know if they do or not.
I remember, I know very few companies, especially some from my time at BitPay, had anything even related to stuff like that, like banking license. Maybe Gemini.
Crazy if they did.
Gemini would have. I would say up there would be Gemini, maybe Circle and stuff like that, because Gemini is one of the only exchanges to operate with full feature set in New York, which is very difficult, right?
Right. So Circle will apply for a U.S. bank charter in the near future, is what they disclosed in last April. So I don't know where that is today, but
they didn't get. It sounds like they're denied. No.
Yeah. Well, there's a few different companies that were looking at that option, and honestly, I think the whole Celsius Voyager debacle kind of shook that space up a little bit, and I guess
these days.
I'm guessing it's going to be a few years before we see practical development on that front. On the note of practical development, I did want to ask you guys earlier back what you guys think some of the first actual real world practical use cases for NFTs are going to be. Like for me, titles is really obvious. Like, why wouldn't you want to make a title? But really quickly on that note, you wouldn't want to do it to an address, an ETH address. You'd probably want to do it to some kind of profile or account. So we still need like a universal Web3 profile in order to even attach said title to it. So I think there's innovation that has to happen on that front first. But what do you guys think are some of those first case
Well, I think
because
you
you guys
already
would know.
implied it.
Yeah.
It's a
Identity
big,
systems, right?
yeah, it's a big
Soft
question.
KYC or hard KYC,
Like,
whatever the hell
who's
it is.
issuing titles? Like
Mhm.
anytime you're issuing anything, then like there's gonna be some top dog that you have to hope is the biggest player in town, right? Otherwise, it's gonna be a
Mhm.
competing, fractured marketplace of, and then it gets like messy with land titles and shit, right? Like in many aspects, like it's actually easier in some countries for people who are from that area to deal with land because they just have to talk to someone and pay some money and they're good to go, essentially, right? Like that's how
Mm.
it works in some places in India.
Right.
Um, they don't even want that, basically, in some aspect, in some ways, you
Right.
know.
I mean, I'm sure land
Uh,
titles.
hmm,
Go ahead.
I think whatever this practicality movement will look like in the
Mhm.
sense of like what real world things get NFTified. I'm wagering my money that I won't know what it is right now more than
Mhm.
anything else. To be fair, I do know that like title transfers when you if you purchase a real estate in most Western democracies, it's a particularly confusing and arduous long process of like a
It
holding
is.
company having to be in the between. Now, could that be something that could be more efficient? Again, I don't know that business and how many red tape there is for such a
Mhm.
settlement to be had. Um, but then again, if you were to be operating within a jurisdiction like China, where the government owns every plot of land and they pretty much gives you like a license to use it, to
Right.
develop on it, rights to do it, it makes a different kind of relationship. Now, so,
Absolutely. Yeah.
like, if we're talking about practicality, would there be an argument to say that the digital yuan, whatever the heck they're calling it, right?
Right.
Like, is that the first true sovereign practicality movement
I
of
really hope not. Like, let's not manifest that, but I do
right?
believe you're probably correct in that. Most governments have had a framework, even if it's not publicly acknowledged. They have had frameworks for CBDCs for quite some time, and there were early crypto companies that actually went like IOTA, the EOSs of the world, the Sora from Sora Mitsu, XOR. You know, these companies, they went out and they actually built CBDCs for banks that were used as test products, and in some cases,
Yeah.
real world products. Like the Bank of Cambodia actually has a CBDC that was built by XOR, right? And so you're probably unfortunately correct. you know.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and then on what you were saying about like land titles, like it is very complex because it totally depends on the nation you live in. Where, for example, in Canada, you have land claim agreements between different autonomously managed groups like native bands and indigenous groups and communities. But then you also have like crown land because we're still part of that constitutional monarchy, right? And so, in a place like the United States where you can actually find private land, a NFT that has title to a private land with private ownership makes perfect sense. But when you have a
Yeah,
mix
I
of
mean,
public and private ownership, it gets very complicated, right?
I mean, I hope it's used in some aspect of like public goods, or I don't know, I'm not
Hmm.
explaining this correctly, but basically any kind of transaction where that's like a governmental transaction that you want the people to be like aware of that type of transaction or what
Right.
exactly is being owned or represented. Like that would be great if that's the first usage of actual NFTs. I don't really see it being used by consumers first or even necessarily businesses in a way
Hmm.
that's nice and like actually uses a public blockchain. I don't know. You see what I'm saying,
There's
dude?
gonna be
It's
a
like
lot of
people
red tape to get over, like
Hmm.
like
advanced
government spending is so
financialization for
fucked. Like
contracts.
we have no insight into local or regional spending of any kind, essentially, right?
I mean,
Uh,
budgets that are in the trillions, even if you did have insights, how are you going to track that?
well,
Like, are you going to
that's
sit
what
on
the
Etherscan and go through
well
each
like
transaction? Like, you know?
that's at the federal level, but at least
Yeah.
at the local level, we don't even
Right.
have insight, right? It's
You're right. You're
like,
right.
we,
Yeah.
like basic shit like that, we don't even have insight. So
Right. What were you saying before, Dave?
I mean, I kind of lost my train of thought, so I got to recover it. Um, what was I thinking? I mean, yeah, so yeah, okay. Excuse me. I mean, like with all this, like I think with all I think a lot of like larger hedge funds when they think about like they have a lot of bespoke contracts The thing is when you operate within a world where, say, consumers don't really should not really be using or touching these NFTs. There should be large settlement firms. Say, if a bank issues a mortgage bond and there's only 5 buyers out there, hedge funds willing to buy it. At what point does it make sense to be an entity beyond just like, I'm going to call you, right?
Right.
And just saying, hey, give me your lawyer, we'll sign something, we'll set the terms, call it a day. Their old systems work. It is kind of my very jaded answer.
Yeah.
Like, if I need a credit default swap with hedge fund number B,
it's still like a many fundamental problems I think that should be focused on first by people. Just like, all right, local cryptography. How do we make the best wallet for a user, like for normal people?
Right.
Like it's an infinitely large question that is always people are chipping at, but we have not necessarily made advanced progress towards that direction.
And like, argue me if you don't agree with me. I just don't feel like consumers are particularly brilliant financial operators within an advanced economy. Like, I think what people do,
but the
promise
is interesting though, right? The promise as when we were kids of seeing money flying around without the need of a bank account or ID or age 18 or whatever fuck, right? And like you being able to have a website and accept payments without a credit card rail or a bank account routing number, Western Union or whatever fuck, like that is still the dream of crypto, right? We cannot.
Can't you do that with Shopify and crypto integration?
No, because you need a Shopify. Even getting a Shopify account is a pain in the like. You need a business, right?
Yeah.
So, like I can't
and like fair enough. Account and start. You got to open up a store and get. Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
And you have to pay for that too. You have to pay Shopify to do that. So like, the dream foundation of like crypto is still
like
there.
What I'm pretty much soft implying in my thing is like, I totally agree. I would love that as a kid and both still now. I think a lot of people in DeFi are a lot of people who think things can be financialized via NFTs have this. I think there's thesis kind of pinned on that the everyday hedge fund will exist. In the sense that like there's somebody like, for example, Index Co-op is probably one of the best examples of if they succeed, they would prove me wrong. If they don't succeed long term, then I feel more strongly about my opinion, because they do very advanced tokenization of financial strategy and products, to the point where like these things are pretty. Not talking they're like DPIs. I'm talking like they're leverage products. They're like market neutral yield products. All these very complex, more like advanced trader kind of shit, where you're like, I'm here making 10% yield year by year. I'm not here trying to YOLO my stocks into GameStop and hope for 100x, right? Like there's like a different play style there. Now, how low does that get? Like how much, like how unsophisticated does somebody have to be willing to participate within those systems where,
you're right,
very advanced hedge funds, they're like speculating on freaking like diamond mining rights in the middle of God knows where, or speculating on like shipping insurance. Like the things they can speculate on is absurd to me, right? Like I didn't even know you can speculate on half the stuff, but they do it because they have the know-how, the sophistication, the money to deploy to speculate in those markets, right? Obviously, crypto makes those speculations hopefully easier long term. Is that under the implication that more people are willing to speculate because it's easier to speculate? I'd be happy to speak as well.
More people are probably going to be speculating because of the access to rails, but we don't predict necessarily that more people are going to be right. If anything, it's only going to aggregate towards a smaller and smaller group of people with better sophistication, right? As anything, that happens in any market, pretty much. So,
I want to touch back on something you mentioned before, Ash. You mentioned, the wallet experience. And I want to just pick you guys' brains on this. Correct me if I'm wrong. MetaMask is created by Infura, or who's Consensus? Sorry, yes.
Consensus made Infura.
Right, and so I've been noticing, and I'm just curious about this. If you guys have caught on to this, I've noticed it on a few platforms, particularly Known Origin, where it no longer prompts me with the opportunity to connect my MetaMask wallet. It doesn't even give me the option when I click wallet connect. You know how it gives you all your different potential wallet, right? And it made me think, That's kind of interesting. If there's a scenario where I can't use my Ethereum wallet because it's created by a particular organization, that's kind of dangerous. And then it got me thinking, I wonder if there's going to be an innovation to be said for wallets that are attached to your Web3 profile. So assuming you actually have like a sovereign profile, that you could self-generate a wallet attached to that profile, not, associated with the consensuses of the world and others who have created a wallet and are responsible to maintain it.
Well, your identity should be associated with your address, right?
Right, but you're in the case where, for example, you can't use your address because they're not letting you use your MetaMask wallet with a certain software, kind of creates some constraints on that particular address, right? So I was thinking, yeah,
the dipshit Web3 answer is migrate your private key. But two, I'm just going to answer this at a very technical level.
Mm-hmm.
MetaMask is like the most cookie cutter basic way of connecting for most, if not all, in the sense that like if you make a wallet, you're pretty much making a MetaMask style connection apparatus.
Basically,
like that,
right.
That at a technical rails, even if they say we don't support MetaMask, but we support this wallet, even if you accidentally clicked on it, it probably even works with MetaMask.
Yep.
Just out of the case that like most, if not all systems, they all follow the same exact rail.
Right.
It's just
right.
like this is called MetaMask, this one's called not. So it maybe just a purely UI thing.
It probably is.
Some websites.
Yeah.
Now, why would they do that? Themselves, I have no clue.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of like small things I also think about too. Like, I mean, one is like we can't forget too that for any like realistic like world scenario of people having financial assets, like it cannot be that public where I can just look up some person's like thing if it's like even remotely leaked, in any capacity. Like if I interact with them one time, now I know everything they have, right? Which is weird.
Right.
Can't forget that. Can't forget. Like people just kind of glance over that as being just like, all right, that's how Web3 works, guys. But hey, I mean, we're in this business too, right? So we're working with it. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it would be pretty cool if there was like a profile where you could select which of your addresses that you own the private key to, you could make public or private. And obviously there's some technical constraints there. That probably sound ridiculous to say that, but it would be pretty cool if there's a way to do that. Do you guys immediately off the top?
I'm certain those guys are doing it.
The
folks that are making profile identity companies.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, I mean, that's why there's some elegance in the way that Bitcoin works, right? It's like that multi-threading component of business transactions. Like that actually, I think people underestimate how weird that is from a business level. Like let's say you're doing batch payouts. You're trying to pay a bunch of vendors. In Ethereum, you have to sequence those transactions. If one fails, you got to reach.
It sucks.
Like, you have to detect that and then keep going, right? So I think people forget like basic shit like that. It's like it's not optimized for payments, really. It's not even really optimized for owning shit, so.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that reminds me as an EVM knucklehead. I was like, wait, you guys are right.
It's optimized for interaction, right? It's optimized for interaction. I think that's our strong suit now. We just keep playing to that. But the practicality things, like we gotta, I guess, at some point throw most of those questions out the door because we're living in absurd land for the most part.
Yeah.
Let's keep pushing that needle like as far as it can go and see what happens.
Yeah, I wonder like if you were to do like this whole private thing, I feel like you can't just say. I feel like now this is me as a potential consumer. I just would not find it adequate to just be like, oh, these two addresses are mapped to me. I would love for there to be like a flow or be like secretly send money,
right,
or whatever, right? Like some way where you're like, oh, it's not just that these two addresses are mine. It's no like I just want some of my transactions to be attributed to me or some of my wealth, whatever that means, right? Like I feel like there has to be a better UX than just having an array of addresses that like I've kind of whitelisted to my identity. Because it's like, what if I have like wealth in A and B, but I wanted to secretly put it in C, or I have secret money in C that I want to put in B,
right?
Like, to make it public. it's not quite particularly intuitive as UX.
Really isn't.
Um,
Yeah.
so I feel like the real work would have to be there. If you really
Yeah.
want to make a good wallet experience
Yeah.
with identity management, like,
Yeah, and then Solana is a really weird like in between thing where it's just like it's the
Mhm.
same thing as EVM, all the same problems, but it's just like slightly harder to like
Yeah.
find some like to find.
dude, I've
personal-
read Solana
Yeah,
transactions. There's some.
yeah, it's too much shit. Just too much shit. Like
It's like,
it's such a
'cause
weird.
they designed it
weird
with so many
That's
like
funny.
what are they called, like programs? It's like,
Yeah,
my God, I cannot understand what's going on inside. And maybe it's just me being an EVM knucklehead, but like, but for one, their goddamn blockchain got to stop like freezing every month or two, and stop
It's more than
working,
that.
right?
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm curious if either of you guys have heard of the product Fala. It's still being built. It's a Polkadot product. But how it works, and I'd just be curious to get your guys' opinion on it. Phala, if you wanted to look it up. They created a sister product on Kusama called Khala, Khala. And how this product works is you can create, they're called like P wallets. Basically, they're like private wallets. And I might not explain this even correctly, but basically you have the option of creating this way to send funds to a private wallet and then obscure your identity and send that from a private wallet that is basically anonymous, send it to wherever you need to send it, right? And so I believe they were even working with DM at one point when DM was a thing to create like PDM, which was supposed to be like their private version of DM using this technology. And it just sounds like a halfway point between what you guys are talking about, having, not just like whitelisted addresses, but sending your tokens from a particular address to another address that you control that has that masking process and makes it private. But then you mentioned like the UX and like the capabilities of like the average person, or maybe even like the financial literacy in crypto of people using the systems. Like most people probably aren't going to migrate to that system nor know how to use it or even care about it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, also, I feel doubtful of any kind of these. I guess you could say proprietary is not really proprietary, but like
Mhm.
any kind of solution developed by a team, and I don't know if it's going to work. Just something to be said about like the truly decentralized nature of Bitcoin, the fact that
Mhm.
it's supported by literally every crypto exchange, right? You're not even a crypto exchange if you don't support it. That is an interesting fact, right?
Interesting.
Right.
And it's also in every country, right? So something to be said
That's a
about
one way to
that.
say it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, I think about it, it's like, I would not like to use Venmo as much
Yeah.
if it posts my bank account and how much money I have there and my credit card debt and my, in effect, all my other holdings and my credit card points every time I send it to somebody. Like,
Right.
if I like, hey, I'm gonna buy your couch for $100. Here's all my financial data along the way.
Yeah.
It's just a lesser product, I guess, for me.
Yeah.
And we haven't really figured that out, I guess, within the EVM worlds, the computational blockchain world,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah. Like I have a bad habit of sending my entire contact card, basically, like the e-card,
Yeah.
to new numbers whenever I meet someone. And that has all my like old addresses and like email
Shit.
addresses, like all my shit, So like it's kind of funny. It's the equivalent of that basically. It's like so
When I was younger, I used to store a whole bunch of passwords in like the notes section of my contact card. I don't know why I did. But somebody asked me to send them my contact, right? And I went through it and I was like, oh my God, I'm compromised.
jeez.
Yeah. Well, it's been about, I guess over 90 minutes, guys. Is there anything you guys wanted to continue to pick away at, or?
Update on the ritual stuff. It's
Mhm.
coming along. Again, we're not working at the crazy neck pace that we were working, which constituted nearly like 10, 12-hour days nonstop for the last 2 months.
Right.
We're trying to have a little bit of a balance of life, but they're coming along. Contracts are in. Now I'm kind of going through the hard part of wiring stuff up, which means like where contracts goes where, because there's like a litany of contracts that has to all work perfectly to get you the metadata to work. So I'm going to be going through that process. We'll get the UI ready, but it's coming. And, you know, I think we said October was when we hopefully can get the ritual done within all I think that's totally reasonable for
We're
us.
gonna meet, for sure. We're gonna meet that deadline within this.
And we're already, I think we're already implied in our conversation. We were always a very forward-thinking studio. We got new things working.
Yeah.
Planning around things that are exciting. We're finding ways to also kind of kick back to our constituent community. I'm not going to say more without people over speculating on that statement.
The whole purpose of this conversation really is like why we're talking about like higher level and abstract ideas, like taking a step back, is one, it's like recentering us as a studio, our intention, both of our intentions and what we're trying to do day to day, and then like with purpose, right, and coherence. And I'm using still more abstract words, but yeah, that's basically.
Which I think it's like I'm not putting ourselves too hard on that. It's just like, you know, we're in the pits of a bear. It's good. It's damn good time to be sitting here calibrating, right?
Yeah,
totally.
Especially as a, you know, we're not like, if we're a venture backed business, then like, we need to.
Yeah, we have to buy into our own thing, and then
you know we have to have a path of attack, but I think we are more capable of just figuring it out in time, in due time, right? So things are coming along. I know if some folks are probably going to comment on how quiet some things are, but then again, we're you know.
That's a reflection of the market, though. It's not like just our servers quiet. I'm in like, you know, 24 servers that are even more quiet, and Twitter's a ghost land, you know what I mean? So, or ghost town. So it's all a matter of perspective, and like you're quiet because you guys are busy building. That's a good thing. You know what I mean? They should be more concerned if you're hanging out on Twitter. Go ahead.
Yeah, bear market's always the best time to ask like big critical comments, you know, questions about just everything we're doing, right? It's like that. This is the best time because once you're in the bull market, it's just pretty much like it doesn't fucking matter. Like the price is going up. Like let's just ride it, right? Essentially, so this is the time to, I think, audience or pretty just anybody we're working with, just to keep deeply think about why is it working the way it is? It doesn't make sense. All the start of this,
I feel like deep down, one of my personal goals is, what I think we should maybe carry forth with the studios. Whatever our opinion was about crypto and NFTs entering the bear, out of the bear, we should have a very different opinion.
Yeah,
just out of like that should be the exercised goal, right? Like,
yes.
We necessitate our own change, because if we don't change, then the next bull market will never come.
You're right. Yeah.
So, and I think the first few months of a bear, everybody's very impatient about that. They're like manifesting a new idea, but like, mate, this is just you re-buzzwording the same idea you had during the bull. So in due time, I think we'll go through the process. But I think this is a measure of, you know, we are of folks that have been through a prior bearish situation, maybe once or even twice at this point. Maybe it's our third time. I think for some newer folks that haven't quite felt what we maybe felt before, it's challenging, it's new. And my best thing to say is stick to your guns. If you wake up still caring about crypto, usually it pays you well long term, and either reputation, money, whatever.
I mean, I just get to keep reminding myself, in less than 2 years, everything is going to be different. Our sentiment, our day-to-day, everything's going to be different. And,
I can't wait for the days where we're like, how the fuck did we use MetaMask all the time? It's like,
true. I can't wait for that day. Awesome.
The one day that, you know, maybe Phantom supports EVM. I don't know. Whatever.
Hopefully. Right. Well, awesome, guys. That was a pretty good show. For all you guys who tuned in, thanks so much for listening. You can join the conversation on Discord, discord.gg/POB. Feel free to hop in anytime, ask your questions. We want to hear from you guys. Again, we'll see you guys next Friday. Hope you guys enjoyed the show.